donde quiera que
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first session of the series of virtual scenarios entitled Long-Term Scenarios for the Development of National Clean Energy Transition Plans in Latin America. I am Pablo Carvajal. I am Social Program Officer in the Innovation Center at IRENA in Bonn, Germany, and I will be your host as well as moderator for today. Before starting out, let me say that simultaneous interpretation can be listened to through Interaction. You can download this app in your Apple Store or Google Play.
Simultaneous interpretation through the Interactive app. You can download it on your mobile phone and use the code FOREPLAN if you would like to follow in English. Muy bien, esta es una serie, una iniciativa conjunta de la...
This is a joint initiative from the IRENA group, ECLAC for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Transform program. The idea is to have a platform to exchange experiences amongst government energy planners in Latin America with a development focus and looking at different scenarios towards a clean energy transition. We will have two presentations from countries in the region who share their experiences in these kinds of scenarios. We also have 10 countries that are present. We will have ministries that have to do with energy planning in the region. This is also conducted in the Technical Forum of Energy Planners for Spain, led by ECLAC, and it's also part of IRENA's plans having to do with long-term energy transition. This is starting today with Colombia and Brazil. These are two countries that are in the same process and that have energy transition plan institutions. Aside from these, these countries have already published their plans up to 2050, and we'd like to take advantage of this scenario in order to check out how important this in the preparation of the national plans. We will start out with welcoming words from the organizers. We will then hear Brazil and Colombia. We'll then have a conversation between the members of the panel, the moderators and participants, and then we'll have an interactive survey and questions to the audience. Please use your phones for this survey. You can also download a QR in order to answer the survey. And we will also hear or receive your questions through the WebEx chart. You can also introduce yourselves. Let us now immediately go into the opening words from the organizers. I first of all give the welcome to Asami Miketa, who is the Senior Program Officer from IRENA. You have the floor.
Thank you, Pablo, and good morning, everyone. So this webinar series is a result of cooperation between two initiatives of IRENA and CEPAL over the last couple of years. And on IRENA side, we have been running long-term energy scenarios for clean energy transition network and a campaign under the Clean Energy Ministerial Framework. These LTES, or long-term energy scenarios initiatives, have been collecting best practices on the use and the development of scenarios for effective energy planning, especially in the context of clean energy transition. We are very happy that through the cooperation with the Energy Planners Forum of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is managed by CEPAL, the IRENA's global network of LTES practitioners can learn from the experience in the region and also vice versa. What we have learned through the activities of LTS network so far is the importance of having a good governance structure over the scenario-based planning when planning transformational changes towards clean energy transition. So that includes, for example, open and transparent stakeholder consultation, coordination across different planning processes, and communication strategies. Clean energy transition also demands that to expand the scope of traditional energy scenarios to include issues like electrification of end-use sector, decentralization, decarbonization, innovation, digitalization, as well as socio-economic impact. So we believe that this webinar series will provide a great platform to exchange experiences on scenario-based planning in the region, and we look forward to the exciting sessions to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asami, for those introduction. Now I would like to give the floor to Rubén Contreras. Rubén, ¿nos acompañas?
Hola, hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Se escucha?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me? It's a pleasure to greet you, to greet all of you who are joining us, and I thank you also for moderating this first joint activity that is conducted within the forum. I also thank Asami for your support, and evidently I thank our partners. GT Transform. This is extremely important because going forward into this energy transformation that we are searching for in the region and throughout the world will not only allow us to decrease CO2 emissions, but also will allow us to depend less in the tremendous dominance of fossil fuels in the last decades. These are things that will help us to have a better power service, a better interconnection, and to develop in the future, perhaps having a regional electrical market in the region. And this all has to do with planning. And planning naturally is also evolving. We're going from the classical economic mathematical accounts, looking for more sustainable systems, having in mind social and environmental topics as well. And planning can also be related to job creation. It's a long endeavor, yes, but it's worth it. I thank you all for being here with us. What's important, I'd say, is to share knowledge. We cannot go forward without doing so. I'm not just talking about technical assistance and the assistance from the international organizations. And we must also hear from countries with experience such as Brazil and Colombia. And this is a must in order to understand better how these countries have gone forward, what are the challenges they face, and how to learn from their errors. Thank you all. As of ECLAC, we are certainly willing to support you all. We are an open institution to different communications. I also thank Brazil and Colombia for your support. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Rubén. It is indeed a pleasure to work with ECLAC in the region. And I now welcome Antonio Levy, who is a technical expert from GT Transform. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Asami and Rubén, for being here with us. I am Antonio Levy, and I'm a regional coordinator of Get Transform. Get Transform is a program from EU towards the public sector in the midst of energy transition plans. We are working with the German, Swedish, and Dutch cooperation agencies. We aim at learning or leading the experience from different countries and from different regions into other countries. We are right now offering technical assistance And we are indeed pleased to be part of this initiative in virtual fora on energy transition plans. As we just heard, it's important to exchange experiences in the region and throughout the world, learning from the different challenges faced and good success stories. We are also thankful for being here with Irene, who will be offering us different scenarios in the region. We will share the relevance of this endeavor in the midst of the large problems in the region. We're talking about the integrated systems and naturally decentralized energy plans as well. Without further ado, I greet you all, and let me say that it's a pleasure to open up this series of virtual seminars. Go ahead, Pablo. Thank you. Thank you, Antonio. Sami and Ruben, I immediately give the floor to our presentations. I wish to welcome Tiago Barral, who is chairman of EPE Brazil, as well as Cristian Jaramillo, who is Director General of UPME from Colombia. Thank you for being here with us. First of all, we will give the floor to Tiago, who will be speaking for 15 minutes, and then Cristian for another 15 minutes. And then we will have a Q&A or conversation session. Without further ado, Tiago Barral has the floor. He was appointed chairman of EPE, Energy Research Company. He has been there for 13 years now. He's been in charge of environmental energy studies, and he's leading the project development division. He's in charge of studies on energy efficiency, and energy perspectives for the long term. He is a civil engineer. He has a master's degree in water resources and the environment, and that was obtained at the Porto Alegre University. He has led the Brazilian National Plan for Energy Transition, so he's the perfect person to tell us what's been happening in Brazil in terms of this plan. Welcome, Tiago.
Guys, I will speak in English because I don't feel confident enough to do it in Spanish this time. So, and thank you very much to Cepal, Irina, Get Transform. This has been really great collaboration, and Brazil has benefited quite a lot with this collaboration. And I think we have a very active community, and this is really valuable. Today, I want to present to you very briefly, of course, some of the main learnings, takeaways from the process of building the 2050 National Energy Plan of Brazil. So I will start, of course, talking about the concept of the plan, how we built it, and then some key, I would say, key outcomes or key takeaways from the process to share with you what we have learned in this process, and I think it might be of your interest, some of our experiences. So I would start talking about the concept of the plan. A plan can mean lots of things, but in this case, the 2050 National Energy Plan of Brazil, it was meant to be the design of the strategy. So it's a broad perspective towards the energy sector and the transformation, and it's less focused on specific numbers or targets, and it's more interested in harmonizing the number of policies that are in place and that need to be in place. So this is the design of the strategy, of a broad strategy. And of course, from this strategy, we unfold the implementation of the strategy with the action plans. So, for example, we have the modernization of the power sector as an action plan, the new gas market as an action plan, the national policy for biofuels as an action plan, and so on. So, and then we have the following step, which is assessing, evaluating this strategy. Have the indicators and obviously adding layers to this strategy. The plan was built by EPE, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but it's a plan that is adopted by the Ministry of Mines and Energy. And it's adopted as a piece of, as a document that is meant to guide action and provide transparency to what is guiding action from the Ministry of Mines and Energy, and also to help communicate the rationale, the fundamentals of the policies and actions that are being put in place in today and in the coming years. Moving on, what is the purpose of the plan? So I would highlight one point. Many 2050 plans, energy plans, are meant to what we call raise ambition. Raise ambition in terms of setting for the future, in terms of decarbonization, for example. But the National Energy Plan 2050 in Brazil has a different concept. It was not meant to raise ambition in terms of setting a target for decarbonization. It was meant to raise ambition in terms of harmonizing the policies in a very complex country with a very complex society, and obviously aiming at making things happen effectively instead of only, betting that the future we can have terms of targets, but we are more focused on making things happen with a long-term perspective. So this plan is not meant to have scenarios for setting targets for the future. It's much more about building consensus on the main guidelines and the main policies that need to be in place so that we can have energy transition in Brazil harmonized with the need for social and economic development, the need for addressing the problems of the cities, and so on. So it's a different kind of approach to raising ambition, but it's proven to be really powerful from our experience. So we analyze the conditioning factors, the internal and external. We analyze the strengths and weakness, potentialities and vulnerabilities, and the vision is how can we make the most of the energy transition in Brazil. And that is the starting point for the design of this strategy. The design of this strategy in the 2050 plan is on a government perspective, but it recognizes that the government itself alone will deliver no results. We need to have this consensus with government, companies, and society in general. Citizens, consumers, we all need to have a common strategy so that things can really happen, so that politically we can reach what we need to do, so that we have a common perspective. And putting on the paper this strategy, the perspective of the government, with a long-term perspective helps a lot, because it makes easier for companies and society to dissent, to argue, to understand the rationale. So we have seen in the newspapers articles about the long-term strategy. We have seen companies moving, also discussing these elements. So it's the main purpose of the plan is to build consensus, and this is key for moving ahead in the energy transition. The role of EPE. EPE is a public agency under the Ministry of Mines and Energy, but we are a separate institution because we are in charge of the energy planning studies to support policy making and the energy plans. But on the other hand, the policy guidelines also are used as a input for our energy planning studies. So it's a very interesting governance structure. So Brazil has this permanent structure, which is EPE, fully dedicated to energy planning studies. And EPE was responsible for developing the 2050 energy plan under the guidelines of the Ministry of Energy. And finally, the Ministry of Energy accepts the plan, and I will talk about it in the next slide, about the public involvement, public engagement. So during the process of plan, we had 10 public workshops with people from public sector, from the government, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Agriculture, from companies, private sector, and we had more than 300 contributions. We also published 25 technical notes on specific issues that helped build the blocks that are components of the 2050 energy plan. So we had technical notes on demand scenarios, energy demand scenarios, the future of hydroelectricity, the role of natural gas. So all these 25 technical notes were published in 2018. And then finally, in 2020, we had 3 months of public consultation. Actually, we had the plan to do it in a longer period, but because of the pandemic, we turned it out into a virtual public consultation. We had more than 20 presentations and debates, and we had around 70 contributions in this public consultation process. Moving ahead, now I will highlight some of the key takeaways based on what IRENA and the LTES campaign has structured in terms of layers for developing long-term scenarios. The first is strengthening the development of scenarios. First, the government must say what the dilemmas are and write down the questions that they want to answer with the plan, with the scenarios. We struggled a lot before we had these questions because we were working without understanding or having a very concrete understanding of what the government wanted with the plan. Once we had 13 concrete questions that they wanted to answer with the plan, then we moved ahead. Another really important point is that the plan will never be complete. It's never definitive. It's really important to understand that there will be gaps, and we don't have to fill all the gaps. We don't have to cover everything. But and actually, the process of developing the plan was very useful to identifying these gaps, and now we are doing further work to cover those gaps. Another point is the use of tools for modeling. There are approaches of integrated modeling, but we moved to another perspective and approach to actually have specialist modeling, for example, in the power sector, oil, gas, separately, and then integrate and have these integrated analysis of the results and feedback to the models. And that was the approach we chose, particularly because of the power sector. We would lose a lot of information if we tried to model everything in an integrated fashion. So we decided to do modeling separately and then integrated analysis. And it was really a wise decision. And finally, in this topic, I would like to highlight the importance of the participatory process, inclusive process with government, companies, and society. And actually, this process actually changed the concept of the plan and the purpose of the plan as we did it. So we started with a concept, and because of all these contributions in the process, we changed the plan almost entirely. So this was part of the process. Moving ahead, this approach to how to improve the use of scenarios, and I would highlight three aspects. First, communication and use of scenarios depend very much on the level of perception in the high level, political level. So we developed this plan during 3 different governments, with having 4 different ministers along the way. So actually, it was we saw different perspectives, different understandings, and you have to deal with these different levels of perceptions on how to use scenarios and the value of scenarios. Luckily, we have a minister that really understands that, and that also was very helpful in the process. We had this huge effort to communicate that the plan was not a number that we want to reach into 2050. It's much less about the numbers and much more about the consistency of the strategy, the consistency of the various policies, the flexibility of the pathways. We need to understand that pathways are flexible. We don't have to have a straight line. And the main purpose is to avoid regrets and to avoid technology lock-in. So the plan, every time we start explaining the plan, that was the first part, to explain. Don't look at the numbers before you understand the concept and how to use it. And third, we need to understand that we have to follow with additional layers of studies, like we are doing now with the roadmap for offshore wind, with the strategy for hydrogen. So it's also important to understand that we need to carry on developing layers to the plan, and it's a live process. It's like I said, it never ends. And finally, approaches to capacity building in the development and use of scenarios. Our experience shows that it's important to have a training program. We had it at EPE, training with experts on scenario building and scenario use, and it was really useful to develop that in the last 2 or 3 years at EPE. Also develop partnerships to also strengthen the involvement of stakeholders into building new scenarios. We are currently doing that in a partnership with the Inter-American Investment Bank and a think tank in Brazil with this program for energy transition. And finally, I would like to highlight the importance of sharing experiences like we're doing today and on an international level. and the work done by IRENA in the long-term energy scenarios campaign and initiative under the Clean Energy Ministerial, and the work done by the Foro Técnico Regional de Planificadores. It's been really useful, including the workshop that we have that was held in Brasilia 2 years ago, that really helped Brazil reach what we reached with the 2050 energy plan. So these were my key messages, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much.
Tiago,
Thank you very much for your presentation. And this is an excellent work that Brazil has conducted to push forward the energy plan. I do have some questions, but I will pose them afterwards. I hope that you will stick with us. We'll now give the floor to Cristian Jaramillo, who is General Director of the division from Colombia. Can you hear me, Cristian? Certainly, I hear you loud and clear. Let me introduce you. Cristian has more than 20 years experience at government levels, and he's acted as a deputy director of the Statistical Institute, and he has also worked at the Customs Department. He was executive director of the Commission for Gas and Energy. He is a professor in the Economy Department at the Rosario University. He is a mechanical engineer. He has a master's in economy from Michigan University. Cristian, welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you, Pablo. And thank you all for being here with us. Can you please upload my presentation? Yes, I see it now. Fine. Good morning. The title of my presentation is Welcome. Bienvenidos. Now, I will be talking about how to build the planning and what's been happening with our division. This is a ministerial division under the Ministry of Energy. And here at the end, I will talk about our most recent experience in the building of a national energy plan. And that is a prospective plan. Now, we believe that planning must be reinvented in the energy fields. On the left in this slide, you can see the world where planning used to be used in the past. We had different levels of planning reflecting a sector where decisions and actions were adopted top down, and the energy users had little to do or to say for different reasons. But in the long run, because it was difficult to act in receiving the decisions made by the top. And we now have got into a new world on the right side, where in the past there were few solutions for a certain problem, but now we will probably have many solutions available, solutions that can be implemented by different agents that just didn't exist in the past. And this can be done decentralized, and they can all coexist. Now, for different reasons in the energy world that affect us, there are concerns having to do with the environment, with cultural and social issues. We've always had the economical issues, but now these other issues have come to play an important role. And finally, we have the desire of the participants or the users to participate, which is something new. I'd like to stress the fact that the last three items on the right row means that for us the main challenge in planning is something that is not really related to the content of the plan, but to the construction and the implementation of the planning. And this is related to governance of the decisions adopted and action to be implemented. Governance of the system and governance of the planning process is indeed our main challenge. Let me expand on this. Amongst the recent plans that we have adopted, especially those for the expansion of transmission, these are plans that involve 11 elements, such as making a forecast of the possible future, and also looking at the different roadmaps. And these plans are conducted every 5 years. But that is not enough to bring in the lines that we are striving for. And we have noticed that social management in our territories have not been managing this well. As a result, what used to take 2 or 3 years now will take 8 or 9 years to become concrete. And what does this mean? That in the short term, we have to expand our scenarios, that is, expand our action way before, even though there are challenges involved. But this means that we must convince the communities. We must convince them to get on board together with us, making sure then that the communities will also win with the work that must be built. And this has to do with governance. What we're seeing are users that have a lot more visibility, have many ways to participate. And this is going to become even stronger once decentralization becomes more rampant. Quite clearly, we must articulate ourselves better with the other state agencies that have different concerns. We have the environmental ministry, we have the agencies that are in charge of communication with the communities, and with the territorial governments. We must include this discussion in different fields that the territories want to participate. And this goes much deeper than what used to be done by the central planner. And it's important for us to recognize this concern and include it in the way we plan. These are things that we are looking at and that will benefit from the innovation coming into the sector. And the challenge, though, is going to be greater because this innovation will strengthen the participation of different stakeholders. So these are the challenges, and this involves the fact that planning is not just an exercise. The state used to plan the energy, education, etc. But right now, this is an exercise for us to do energy planning. And this involves social and economic considerations. Power planning also now includes things that used to be exogenous facts. But right now, this is also part of it all. This movement, what does this mean? This involves different action plans. And some plans combine different aspects. Here I have 4 types of plans. Under UPME, we have action plans for goals that are already known, for example, that's short term. Then we have development plans that try to set up strategies that can be different, but that strive to go into the same end. And on the right side, we have plans that are long-term plans. These are prospection plans, looking at where we can go as a sector, and projection plans that have to do with a more probable future involving 15 years. It tries to guess the most possible scenario and what can I do to accomplish my goals. Now, the prospective plans, and we'll talk about our own Colombian plan, have 30 years, 40 years scenarios, and even 50 years. It looks at different options, possible alternatives, but it does really go into one single possibility. It explores different actions that can be adopted in order to be consistent with the different alternatives. For example, could it be this technology? Could you do this or the other? And especially identifying the costs of going from one alternative or another. And what then are we able to do according to our goals, and which possible world can we tackle? And the projection plans, on the other hand, separate where we are right now, saying this is my starting point and what can I expect for the next few years. A projection plan would involve, for example, the National Energy Plan. That would involve, for example, the expansion of the lines. These are the plans that we conduct, and they are classified as long-term energy plans. Now, let me tell you about our experience in the National Energy Plan that has just been published a couple of months ago, and it looks to the year 2050, and it will publish results every 2 years. The National Energy Plan includes the concern of governance. The objective of our PEN is to explore possible future scenarios and what are the efforts that must be adopted in that endeavor. And the objective is to put all of the elements up on the table so that the 50-year scenario will show that it's not just the plan that's important, but what about the governance? And this must be regauged every couple of years, and it must be democratic so that all stakeholders, citizens, and stakeholders may have the appropriate information so as to really decide what are the pros and cons involved.
So before we carried out the exercise top down, but today it is built collectively from the very beginning. We sit down with the consumers of what we're creating and create together with them. And we say, what are the things that we should be contemplating to analyze these scenarios? And things came up that were not from the energy world, but when we talk to them, they will have an impact on the energy world, and we include it in all considerations and explorations of the National Energy Plan. Another thing we've done differently with this new National Energy Plan is the Communicational Strategy. The plans that we developed in the past were conceived for the public and the sector, and they had a specific language for the public, for that target audience. And we thought that it was going to be read by the consumer, and that it was a different exercise. It was more academic in terms of presenting the plan, discussing it, and then taking it to the different stakeholders. And we've concluded that the target audience that we need to motivate now is different it doesn't necessarily speak the language of the energy sector. So when we go and share and socialize the plan, the strategy requires that we specifically think how we're going to reach each one. And I don't want to be arrogant, but maybe we should translate it to the target audience so that anyone can understand it. And that was the pioneer exercise that we carried out. And it's something that we found very relevant, but also extremely difficult when we included in the conversation different stakeholders that were not necessarily participating before. And specifically, it's what we did initially with different elements, co-opting elements that would support the analysis. And sometimes we were able to quantify risks with certain certainties. But there are considerations in the plan that we need to make because there are some plans that are true uncertainties. For example, things that you do and that you put in the budget because you need it to carry out the exercise, but you don't really know where these assumptions will take you. You don't really have a full grasp on what they are and what technology you will use, what the implications will be, how we're going to resolve the interaction with the communities and the veto possibilities. So there's many things that you can't really put a number to, and there's many asterisks in these plans that are analyzed, and we need to communicate these uncertainties to the public, but it's difficult. It's difficult to do it without losing authority here. And you can say, oh, well, yeah, that's how we did it. That's our assumption. But being honest in terms of these weaknesses is an exercise that is very difficult. And it's difficult, among other things, because they don't speak the same language as we do. When we talk to the Ministry of the Environment or large companies, large corporations, we all know what it's about. We know what these things are that we don't have that much certainty about. And it's important to communicate these things and that we not lose authority. There's an exercise here of transparency that needs to be seen as such. It cannot be seen as bad planning. So what have we done with the National Energy Plan? We carried out workshops to identify early on what the topics were that we would be addressing, the tools that we needed to identify in order to use. So we carried out 10 workshops with other entities, with people, for policymakers and other stakeholders, and we could call them opinion leaders on specific topics for economic projections. And we did this from the very beginning, at the onset, in order to include their opinions. So consultation processes were made once we had a proposal on the table. That's always part of the process. And after that, we begin the dissemination process, and we took the time to not only present the analysis, but also say, okay, so look, we have this analysis, here's a document. How do we, what can we conclude? And here's the exercise. We said, okay, so if you don't agree with any of the things that we did here, or the way we did it, you can recalculate and do your own calculations and familiarize yourself with the information contained therein. So we did this, and we allowed everyone to play with the data, with everything we built, and that was very valuable. We told everyone, you can analyze and you can use the information and do it yourself. So that's where we are. The next step is where we're going to take the plan and we're going to boil down all the specific messages, take them to different target audiences, basically take it to their homes. So the objective with the National Energy Plan is not to make a decision. It is to bring to the table all the information so that we can have a democratic conversation and that we can have good governance. And here I wanted to mention something very important for the panel and pertinent, of course, which is, so who's your counterpart? Because you've spoken to all these people, but are they prepared to participate in this conversation in a constructive way or not? And we have found that some people are very much prepared and others not so much. And there are things that are being included, different groups that don't have a story here. And in fact, in the planning unit, we have a strategy that aims to do some pedagogy. It's not about persuading, it's about disseminating these energy issues so that everyone can participate, the public at large. So in Colombia, planning has been centralized for historical reasons since the 60s until last century. And since the 90s, the National Planning Institute began reaching out to the different ministries, specifically the Ministry of Mining and Energy, and this is still true. There is an official voice for planning in this sector. There is no official exercise for counterparts between the different entities or groups, and that can specifically be dedicated to planning. But we have this in universities and in some such groups, and large companies have very interesting planning capacities. So we found that some of them were there, some universities, some companies that actively participate, but there hasn't really been an effort till now, a comprehensive effort trying to include all the other agencies, especially because the local governments don't really reach out to civil society. It's different from academia. Civil society is not able to participate in a constructive manner in these specific energy conversations. And that is something that we need to work on. We need to help them participate correctly so that they can be critical, so that they can show us what they need. I'd like to go back to this, what I said in the beginning. It's all very circular. What we see is that planning needs to be relevant for a larger group of people in the population. Planning is an exercise carried out by few, applied to another few, and that is how it was traditionally been done. If we are not able to include everyone in this conversation, it will put a stop to all these plans, and we've seen this in Colombia. This is why we need to modernize the planning exercise. Fortunately, technology helps us, and it helps everyone else, so it also helps us. We're able to achieve a more participative planning, and it is part of the central, of the core message. The goal is not to just make a plan, it's to negotiate the plan. It's not about saying or telling anyone what the route is, but to do it together, to find it together. And we need to think about actions that will last. And when we do this, what's core is that when the time comes to change direction, because of course the plan will be reviewed in a couple of years, and there needs to be trust in the process so that we can all negotiate and not have it become a huge conflict that will stop everything in the sector. So that is the main message. Thank you. Christian, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very complete. And it's interesting to see what Colombia has been doing. Congratulations. I'm going to ask Tiago to join us in this conversation that we are going to have now. I'm going to try to answer or ask some of the questions that we're receiving through the chat. And we're very happy to see that there's these plans elaborated in these two countries. There's some similar lines that have been followed. For example, Tiago began by saying that it was created not to, excuse me, Tiago, we're speaking in Spanish. So this is an exercise carried out by Brazil in order to standardize and have joining perspectives to doing it all together. And Christian said it doesn't matter what the plan is, but how we are going to do it. And I think this is very important. And I think they have similarities. So my question is, and this is, well, to each of you, the same question. In the case that there be opposing visions between the players and it's difficult to find consensus, what do you do with the plan? If you have different and conflicting perspectives, what would you do? I'm going to start with Tiago. He can begin with his answer. Please brief replies so that we can take as many questions as possible.
And switching to English, if we don't understand there is a consensus about some certain aspects of the energy strategy, then the plan is government, and so at the end, the perspective, if there is no clear consensus on some aspect, then the government will put its perspective and hoping that that this position by the government will ignite discussions and further debate that will eventually result in some acceptable consensus. So we don't, of course, we identify consensus, but we want to promote consensus, but sometimes it's not possible to have everyone agreeing on something. And consensus is different from unanimous or unanimidad.
Muchas gracias, Thiago. Christian, tu reacción a lo que dice Thiago y cómo se empata eso.
Thank you, Christian. Would you care to respond? Well, the answer, I think, depends on the plan. The energy plan, even though it's similar to Thiago's, is an exploratory one that doesn't decide which way to go. It says you can go through here, through that way, and what are the costs involved. Thus, in this plan, the need to reach a consensus is not as important. It's important to involve everyone in the analysis, but there are always people who say, okay, I would have been better off with this or the other plan. But the question, though, has to do with the plans for the shorter term and that define action plans, such as, for example, the expansion of coverage or different transition and transmission. And the last voice, though, is the deciding one. What we want in this exercise is to get the whole conversation reflected so that we may have honest arguments, so that in turn we may appreciate the different stands from different agencies. But it's not a democratic plan. It is a plan made by the planner. And it is built gathering all of the concerns. When there's a clear opposition between the conventional generators and in Colombia, this is mainly hydro. That is when a ministerial policy must say, okay, we're going to go in this direction, and the plan will do so. And that's how we're going about it. And this also says that the room for exploration must be transparent. It must also include all of the different voices. And we must also explain well what are the different alternatives. Now, the short-term space requires a voice that in the long run will say, okay, we tried to come to terms with all of the different opinions. At the time then to go into more referential plans, right? Another question is related to energy planning. The community and the community of climate issues. We are all striving to reduce emissions. And the question is, what scenarios have been adopted through the Paris Accord and others? And is there the idea of joining all communities in the same direction?
NDC was built based on scenarios when it comes to energy. Of course, it was based on scenarios built by EP in the past also and discussed with the government. At this point, the 2050 energy plan was not based on a climate scenario itself. And why that? Because that was not identified as the key dilemma for moving ahead the energy transition. Let me explain. Brazil has been under economic crisis in the past few years. We have lots of really complex problems that big cities have to address. So the dilemmas that the participatory, this inclusive process that we had, and based on what the government, people in the government was trying to make sense the energy transition, was less focused on the 1.5 degrees Celsius, but more on how do we make the energy transition as part of the policy process, as part of the. So it was more focused on. I think it was more pragmatic in the sense that before having a number 1.5 and the target itself, we need to address some complexities inside the policy making process to make sure that that things are in place for the ambitions to really happen, instead of just building numbers and ambitions in terms of let's double the target or whatever, more focused on making things happen on the ground at first. So the plan had this approach. And of course, now Brazil continues working on the further NDC and the climate agreement. So we will have further scenarios to support that specifically.
Muchas gracias, Thiago, por esa respuesta. Cristian, la misma pregunta para...
Thank you very much. Now a question. How do you see the Colombian plan and NDC's climate transition plans? Let me tell you how we built it. What we have said is, what are the technologies that we could play with in the future? And then we wondered, what will happen if we continue with business as usual? And we made a study with different scenarios, adopting the decarbonization systems that the government follows. So then we figured out how to use the technologies and what were the challenges that would be faced from the very beginning up to reaching more aggressive goals. So how do we include that? We made exercises with different scenarios according to the decarbonization goal that the government aims at. That was the first part. And there were many challenges involved. The goals for lowering emissions would probably involved large investments. So this is one of the challenge. The second way the exercise goes forward has to do with the current energy grid. In the last couple of decades, we have seen more and more how climate change affects us deeply. And these different scenarios must realize what is my capability of depending on the current grid and what are the needs for diversification in order to mitigate CO2 emission. This is how we have included the climate change into our plans. Thank you, Christian. An additional question is the following. In Thiago's presentation, and elsewhere, we have heard what's happening in Brazil. But there are many uncertainties in your country. But there are different scenarios, one of extreme uncertainty, another with little less uncertainty. The question is, how do you analyze risk and uncertainty with respect to the infrastructure and other needs? We know that this is awfully complicated. But how do you go about that?
Of the key issue on when it comes to building scenarios, long-term scenarios. How do you deal with the uncertainty and the risks? So we did many things to work with that. First, one of the key objectives of the plan is to prevent technology locking, which is picking specific technologies and not understanding that leaving behind other possible solutions might be of great regret in the future. For example, that is an approach that we adopted when it comes to nuclear energy, for example. If you abandon all the existing expertise that Brazil has, what is the chance that we regret that if some of the assumptions that we have in terms of energy transition are not happening effectively in terms of integration of renewables, for example. So and another aspect that we did was to model the effects of changing hydrology. So what if the inflows in the water reservoirs are changed and we have less water availability in the future? What will happen in terms of the system, and how can we prevent that? Diversify the energy mix. So we did in the power sector, we did around 80 cases of modeling different uncertainties. Big uncertainties, around 80. Yeah, so to map that. In a broader perspective, the plan also covered some other uncertainties in terms of the role of natural gas and so on. So I mean, it's a number of ways of dealing with. Depends very much on the uncertainty, but that's it for now.
Gracias, Thiago. Entonces, 80 escenarios para hacer un...
Thank you, Tiago. So you're talking about 80 uncertainty scenarios that you involve in the study. Now, Tiago, in terms of the risks, how do you quantify that? How do you analyze it? Let me start with a discussion on risk, which is a question very much involved in the midterm plans. Uncertainty, that is indeed a big item. The first way to go about this is being really open on the assumptions where we can say, okay, we're supposing this is going to happen, that, for example, hydro is going to have a certain commercial viability by the 30s, and that sort of thing, saying, okay, what happens if this happens afterwards or earlier? Secondly, we did have a discussion on this, but it was not a quantitative one, but it tried to show where there is an effect, but not really valuing, and that is a lock-in. And we always wonder, what will be the role of natural gas by 2050?
De combustible fósil de transición, pero no es para nada claro que en el 2040 la actitud sea la misma y de pronto para el 2040 lo que estemos hablando es de que ya no, o han encontrado alguna manera de hacerlo carbón, no sé. Y esas son esencialmente elucubraciones. Entonces ahí hay una discusión.
So this is a sign of how it's being done. And the idea is to have one be more probable than the others. And to be very open about this assumption. This is an assumption that we believe in. These are the trends that we see. We don't really have any reason to think that these assumptions will materialize. In the short term, well, it's more about risks. There's things that don't turn out as have been planned, and normally what we do is we analyze how much the delay is, how much it will take until this becomes a problem, and reliability. Thank you. Last one, and then we're going to go on to questions from the audience. There are what is the regional perspective? This is an exercise of different stakeholders. How can we sit down with other countries in the region to jointly coordinate and create? That's the question. Tiago.
Okay, just in addition to the last question, one of the key uncertainties that we identified when developing the plan was how the economy will evolve, how we'll see. And so that was the reason why the plan, our 2050 plan, was based on two main economic scenarios. One is a challenging scenario where the economy is boosting and growing fast, and another, the economy is slowly moving forward. So just an addition to that. About integrating regional planning and having, I think we have Oladi already doing great work, and my perspective is we need to do what we are doing here. We need to have this dialogue. This is absolutely key. And we've been doing this in the last 3 years, around 3 years, and it's proven to be really, really valuable for everyone. But I think, bringing the institutions together, Oladi, ARENA, CEPAL, International Energy Agency, and I think on a technical level, it's possible to do, and in terms of making, not only doing the studies in an integrated perspective, but when turning this into political ambition towards more integration, then we have a road ahead ahead of us, and it's proven to be really challenging. The past experience and current experiences show that. So I think we have to use the existing institutions that we have and value them. That's what I see.
Gracias, Thiago. Muchas gracias por esa respuesta. Y Cristian, igualmente la misma pregunta. En el tema de elaborar escenarios y planificación de forma...
Thank you, Christian. Well, Colombia has a positive experience with an exchange and integration with Ecuador. This has been a very important experience when things count. And in South America, there is a natural position where we have conversations with Central America, with Panama, in order to interconnect. We are far from speaking of an integrated planning. We can at least import and export energy. And here I can say this, the analyses that we carry out are somehow cost-benefit analyses, and this cost-benefit analysis, the import and export idea is varying quickly. Today, we want to export to Panama, for example, and there are some agents that are interested. And in 3 years, we've discovered that now Panama wants to export to Colombia. So the interested parties switch. So if you want to materialize this interconnection, which is one step before talking about planning, you need to have political will. And this infrastructure does not arise from us technicians saying, oh, it would be good to have this or that, it's positive. We want to go ahead and say, okay, we need to be connected to this network. We all need to support each other during critical moments. And this political will empirically doesn't need to be like that. But empirically, it has been very difficult to achieve this political will for interconnection, which is very sad, because what is working, it has been fantastic, and everyone has been thankful. And they've always been there when we've needed it, on both sides of this interconnection. Thank you, Christian. As an Ecuadorian, I understand that there is a very good relationship with Colombia, so that's excellent. Thank you. And we need to go to an interactive poll now. You can just take a look at the QR code, scan it, It's important to see what your opinions are. We would like to understand what you feel about, to learn what you feel about this event, about this session. Please, if you don't do that, you can do it on the chat, but those of you who have scanned the QR can actually answer the survey. The questions are as follows. The first question is, what areas require greater strengthening in your country for long-term planning? They are very participative processes, coordination, collaboration with academia, with agencies, interinstitutionality, and the purpose of these scenarios. And we're going to leave that for the participants so that they can give us their opinion, their answers. And the second question is, what are the priorities, the long-term priorities, demand, innovation, power, or hydrogen? We had some questions on hydrogen as well. So maybe we can get a grasp of what you think about hydrogen. So we can look at the polling instructions, and we have Antonio, who's looking at the results of the poll. Thank you, Paulo. We still have 45 votes on the first question. Let's leave it open just one more moment. There's the QR code, so you can scan it, or you can do it through the BitDo link, which is on the screen. We now have 50 votes. Again, if you'd like to see the results, we're going to actually put them here. Could you please share screen with me? Can you see the results? It's a little difficult to use this. I don't see what you see, so I don't really know if you can see the screen or not. But what we see here is that the things that need to be strengthened the most is the collaboration between institutions. And, well, again, the answers are very brief. Sometimes it's not easy to know what they're about, but these are the limitations of this program. So we needed to restrict it to one-word responses. So we have participation, visualization, partnerships, or external collaboration with academia, etc., and interinstitutionality, government, etc., and finally, better communicating the objective or the purpose of these scenarios. Tiago and Christian said the main challenge is not just the numbers, it's transforming these processes, making them more participative and collaborative. We have 75 answers. Here's a second question. What are the priorities that need to be included in long-term energy strategies? The first ones are electric vehicles or sustainable vehicles. The second is human behavior. The third is demand side response. The fourth is innovation. Fifth, electrification. And the fifth is hydrogen, green hydrogen. So here we see the answers as they come in. We see it online, and these are all very pertinent. Let's see how many answers we have. We have 52, 54. So this is very interesting. It goes in line with what Tiago was saying. We need to plan to the future and leave a little flexibility so that you don't just have to lock one single technology. And electrification is interesting. There's many concepts here, but it doesn't really need to stick to a single technology, like Cristian Jaramillo mentioned. Because today, maybe we're talking about green hydrogen, maybe in 10 years it's not that interesting anymore. I want to leave you with that input. We have 61 answers. So that is it for now. Tiago, or would anyone else like to mention anything? Well, this is what we see. I think it's worthwhile making a comment here. I believe that what will determine the direction we will take in the energy sector is human behavior. Because in order to do this, it's difficult because we need to think about the practical considerations. We need to be able to accommodate these new technologies, and it's all a limitation of the scenario building exercise. If I was told what the main feature would be in order to plan this for 30 years, it's governance. Governance is strictly related to what can be implemented through the political aspects. And I don't think we can draw up scenarios in practical terms. Yes, I agree. Tiago, do you have anything to add to this answer from the public? You're muted.
I fully agree with the results. The first poll, but about the second one, now this one that we see here, I mean, it's very incomplete, of course, like any poll, but for example, we don't see the role of biofuels, which is really important. How will biofuels help transition for example, aviation, shipping? What is the role of that? Is all about electrification? Is all about electric vehicles? Is hydrogen as well? Green hydrogen still has a road to reach, lower costs for electrolyzers, for example. And the region, for example, some countries are rich in Argentina, Brazil, and others in natural gas. What is the role of natural gas in preparing and accelerating a market for hydrogen? Not green hydrogen, but hybrid hydrogen, a rainbow range of hydrogen solutions that will effectively create a demand for hydrogen that will create the basis for green hydrogen to evolve. So I think I see that of course these are really important topics, but I think when you look into long-term scenarios, you need to have a more hybrid and flexible and less technology-specific understanding of the transformation of the energy sector.
Muchas gracias, Thiago. Vamos a tomar esa observación, vamos a complementar esta lista.
Thank you. We're going to supplement that list, including gender, security, employment, and other broader aspects. We will continue with the following sessions.
We are slightly behind schedule, but I do have a couple of information to inform. I wish to thank our speakers for their excellent presentations from Brazil and Colombia. And let me say that we do have a network that is called a LTES network. LTES network. And this is an appeal for the agencies that are in charge of energy in our country so that they may join us in looking at the new progress and we would like to learn what are the ministerial agencies doing in order to face the scenarios towards energy transition. So I'd like you all to join this network. Now, in a couple of weeks, we do have another meeting, and that will be with Costa Rica and Panama. With that, we are closing our meeting. Thank you all for participating, and we also appreciate the organizers for this excellent event. Very well. When you are, before you leave, please fill in the survey. And we would also like to get the group picture photograph. Yes, the photograph is very important. Thank you, Tiago. Thank you, Christian, for your support. Indeed, we at ECLAC hope to see you at the planning forum. And there we will look at many, many challenging topics such as intelligent cities. Thank you, Pablo, for the coordination and for the excellent way you have moderated this meeting. Thank you all.